Hello and welcome to tonight's episode, which is an ongoing formation series of Discernment of Spirits. Why do we need discernment of spirits? Because there's always going to be some sort of spiritual warfare going on. So today we're going to cover chapter 11, so don't you dare go anywhere because this one's going to be sweet and jam-packed. Hello, my name is Farah Rose Perry, Sister Farah Rose Perry, OFS, and I welcome you to tonight's version of Discernment of Spirits. This is a book by Timothy Gallager that we've been following. I hope I don't have too much glare there. And he has a lot of great commentary, and I have condensed it and shortened it for you so that we can follow along and learn about these rules that he has for us to study in deciding what it is that's pestering us. Is it a good spirit? Is it a bad spirit? So if you get something from this video, give it a thumbs up if you can. And if you don't, leave me a criticism, because you know what? I don't grow unless I get criticized good. So all critiques are welcome. Now, in this series, which there have been 10 more before this, St. Ignatius of Loyola puts out a set of rules, and these rules are to help us to get through the pitfalls of growing closer to God. And in doing so, we're going to be, shall we say, guarded by our guardian angels, and we're going to get lots of consolation. We're going to get imaginings of great, shall we say, calm, connectedness to God. We're going to get all those fabulous feelings that come with following our faith, following a prayer life, and a love of God that is almost unshakable. And I do say that because as this book, as the rules point out, for every fabulous mountain that we're going to climb, we're also going to have those valleys that are so low that we're going to wonder about our faith. We are going to be shaken up by bad spirits, by evil spirits called the demonics, the lower level demonics that will do everything they can to oppress our brains. So if you're new here, I hope you follow along and maybe go back to the first. And if you're returning, I hope you have your notebook to make some notes. As we begin, we will pray ourselves in. We will read excerpts from chapter 11 and we'll get right to it. So let us pray. In nomine Patri et Filio et Spiritus Sanctus, sic erat in principio et nunc et semper et saecula saeculorum. Sanctum Michael Arcangele, defende nos in prelio contra nequitiam et insidiis diaboli, esto presidium. Imperit ele Deus, supplicis debcam tuque. Princeps maletia celestis satanam aliosque, spiritus malignos, qui ad perditionem animarum pervigantur in mundo divina virtute detrude. Amen. Suscipe Domine universum meam libertatem, accipi memoriam invocatum atque voluntatem omnem, quid avio vel possideo. Mihi largitus est, et tibi totum restituo ac tui prorsus voluntati tradu gubernandum, amore tui solum cum gratia tui mihi dones, et divis sum satis, ec aluit quidquam ultra porsco. Amen. Discernment of Spirits, an Ignatian guide for everyday living. Chapter 11, or Rule 11, Spiritual Consolation and Spiritual Desolation, Finding Our Balance. Both spiritual movements in a single rule. After a set of rules addressed to persons in time of spiritual desolation, Rules 5 and 9, and a rule for those in time of spiritual consolation, Rule 10, Ignatius now gives us a rule in which both spiritual movements appear together. Rule 11 reads, the 11th, let one who is consoled seek to humble himself and lower himself as much as he can, thinking of how little he is capable in the time of desolation without such grace or consolation. On the contrary, let one who is in desolation think that he can do much with God's sufficient grace to resist all his enemies, taking strength in his Creator and Lord. Prior to this point in the rules, Ignatius has focused on each of these two spiritual movements individually and counseled us regarding how we are to act and think during one and the other. This ongoing alliteration of spiritual consolation and spiritual desolation is inevitable. The rule is articulated according to the same principle of contrariety that we have seen throughout. The two halves of the rule are divided with the now familiar on the contrary, because spiritual consolation and spiritual desolation are contrary to each other. So too, the response of the discerning persons to the one will be the contrary of their response to the other. The 11th rule describes both responses, and in placing both side by side, highlights the resulting spiritual balance toward which Ignatius would guide persons of discernment. In the first half of this rule, Ignatius speaks to those in spiritual consolation. Now, this is presenting to them both an attitude they are to work towards and seek, and the manner of seeking it. The person in spiritual consolation is to seek a humble heart. Ignatius has already taught us that one principal reason for which God permits us to experience spiritual desolation is to anchor us more deeply in an evangelical humility. Rule 9, third cause. Now, in Rule 11, Ignatius returns again to this theme and urges the one in spiritual consolation to seek actively this attitude as much as one can. Certainly, humility is blessed in itself and draws upon us the grace of God. 1 Peter 5. For Ignatius, a humble heart is the rich spiritual soil from which all other virtues spring. A heart that is humble is a heart completely open to embrace God's call. As always in these rules, however, Ignatius is addressing specific needs in regard to discernment, awareness, understanding, taking action of the movements in our hearts. A humble heart, he tells us, will assist us in a particular way in a time of spiritual consolation. Now, what will happen if God's gift of security in time of spiritual consolation is accepted by those so blessed, but without a corresponding effort to seek that humble heart? Then, like Peter on Holy Thursday evening, filled with great love for the Lord and rejoicing in the warmth of the Lord's friendship, the very sense of security may expose them to ill-considered spiritual steps with a consequent risk of spiritual collapse. Mark 14:27 through 31. Peter will indeed come to be rooted in humility, but only after his painful fall, when fear overcomes the personal strength on which he presumed in his time of closeness to the Lord. A heart that welcomes with joy the grace of spiritual consolation and simultaneously seeks as much as it can to remain humble will not presume in this way on its own energies, and so will be spared the pain of such failures. This path towards such humility lies in the choice to think in certain ways while we are in spiritual consolation. The one who is experiencing spiritual consolation is to think, quote unquote, of how little he is capable of in the time of desolation without such grace or consolation, end quote. To think back, when in spiritual consolation, on how we conducted ourselves in past spiritual desolation, whether we remained faithful to or relinquished our prayer, whether we persevered in our proposals or made changes to them, whether we used the means to resist, worked to remain patient, thought of future spiritual consolation, or failed to do these things, will give us a true gauge of our spiritual energies and teach us of our very real need for the Lord's continuing help. In this way, we are protected while in spiritual consolation from experiences parallel to Peter's in Mark 14, and will delight in the closeness of the Lord and good-willed but naive presumption on our own spiritual energies, followed by painful failure. How strong were we, in fact, during the darkness and sadness of past spiritual desolation? Would we have said, quote unquote, it all seems hopeless and meaningless? Did we grow discouraged? Did we feel disquietude, confusion, and a sense of discouragement? Now, this choice, when in spiritual consolation, to think back to past experiences of spiritual desolation and of how little we were capable of at the time of desolation without grace or consolation, is, Ignatius tells us, an effective way to root us into fruitful humility. Such humility safeguards and confirms the gift of the spiritual consolation presently enjoyed. This thinking, like the earlier kinds of thinking Ignatius counsels, will not arise spontaneously. The choice must be made to think in this way. If there is, in spiritual consolation, a feeling of spiritual security, in spiritual desolation, the exact contrary movement is true. Here, there is such a sense of great spiritual insecurity. The heart cries out, I can't do this, I'm perishing. And this feeling of abandonment and helplessness, with its accompanying insinuation of an inevitable spiritual ruin, is familiar to all who have undergone spiritual desolation. Although in the second half of Rule 11, Ignatius returns to the ground already covered in Rule 7 and 8, how we are to think in time of spiritual desolation, a brief review of his words here is helpful. The language is charged with hope a characteristic of all the thoughts that Ignatius counsels for the time of spiritual desolation. The one in spiritual desolation is to think he can do much with God's sufficient grace to resist all his enemies, taking strength in his Creator and Lord. Remarkably, we are to think that God's grace suffices so that we can resist all our spiritual enemies without exception. Through all these thoughts and actions to which they lead us, we will be taking strength in the Creator and Lord, a strength that sets us firmly on the path toward God. This indispensable presupposition of such a balance is a daily spiritual awareness. All faithful persons will experience the continuing fluctuations of spiritual consolation and spiritual desolation. Such experience alone does not form the discerning person. What makes this spiritual balance possible is the continual transition from myself in to myself reflecting on myself in spiritual consolation, spiritual desolation. As we said from the start, the choice to live with such an ongoing spiritual awareness, this is the beginning of discernment and the gateway to spiritual freedom. Now, if all dedicated people in the circumstances of life to which God has called them seek to maintain this balance of a humble heart, in spiritual consolation and a trusting heart, in spiritual desolation, they will find themselves progressing safely and perseveringly toward God. As always in these rules, it is towards just such freedom that Ignatius guides us. Well, this is an interesting topic, isn't it? We've got to figure out, what are we going through right now? Are we in consolation? Are we in desolation? Are we in a holding pattern? There are so many aspects to our journey, and this is a rare chance for me to say hello to everybody because this is a live show. So I wanted to thank each and every one of you for coming out. I see that we've got a number of people here. Pipolo, Athena, Jennifer, and I think Matt's in there somewhere. Thank you all for showing up. Thank you all for following along, and thank you for your support. Please like this video, give it a nice fat thumbs up, and share it if you can for somebody that might need this, because I think, you know, we have so many tools at our disposal in the church to grow in our spirituality, to seek God in our spirituality, to understand what is our vocation, whether we are a mother, whether we're professed, whether we are a father, whether we're a firefighter. Each one of us is a part. Each one of us is a part of an ongoing growth, an ongoing experience of relying on God, growing in God, of our soul just expanding. And it's not going to end. And this is what Ignatius is trying to tell us here over and over again in this chapter. He's telling us that we are going to experience, as many times as we're going to be happy, we're also going to be very sad and very bereft and wondering, where's God? Why don't I feel God? Why am I praying and praying and praying and not feeling anything? And then Are we going to assume the worst? Are we going to assume that God's left us? Are we going to, as I was speaking with someone the other day, one of the cases I handle, we go forward 2 or 3 steps and we start gaining all this confidence in our spiritual consolations and in our prayers and in our, in our office and what we do, and then something will set us back. And 9 times out of 10, this discernment of spirits won't kick in right away. We're just going to feel awful. We're going to feel off kilter. We're going to feel as if we're not good enough. We did something wrong. We're going to be, as they say, lost in the morass of the circumstance. And as this chapter points out, where are we in life? Are we in a marriage? Are we in a job situation? Are we in a parent-child situation? Where is it that we've been, boom, cast off, thrown off kilter, and we're not sure which end is up? This is the power of discernment of spirits. Because we are unaware, this is how we're attacked. The battlefield really is in the mind. So if these little minions are so easily playing with our heads when a circumstance arises, this chapter right here reminds us in all things, remember what consolation was like. It will come back again. That's a really cool thing, is that we have to know and we have to understand that God will always be there. He's always waiting for us. However, like any good parent, he wants us as toddlers to grab a hold of the table and stand up. And once we get a hold of that table, he wants us to push off and start running toward him. This is very, very difficult in times of spiritual desolation, because our mind can be attacked and we're going to imagine the worst. We're going to see the worst. We're going to feel the worst. We're not going to believe what we normally would when we're in times of spiritual consolation. This is why Ignatius is warning us. This is our opportunity to adopt an attitude. We have to be aware. That's what he was pointing out in this chapter. We are aware. We understand. And then we fight right back. We resist the desolation. We step into the consolation knowing that this consolation is wonderful. It's great. It's fabulous. It's like the best things in sliced bread. It's not going to last. We are due. For as we grow, we attract the lesser spirits. The lesser spirits that are waiting to trip us up. And they're coming for us. And we will never be tried. We will never be afflicted beyond what God knows, what each and every one of us can handle. So we really need to buckle in here, because this chapter is called balance. And what is balance? We are on a spiritual tightrope, and at any time we can hold ourselves together and be confident, and we can walk forward, and we can just feel so alive and so grateful. And everything we see, from a parking space we get to, somebody opening a door for us, we're just so full of grateful and love and joy and attitude. And then boom, desolation hits. Everybody's ugly. Everybody's nasty. Nothing works right. Checks are bouncing. Bills are coming in. People are hateful. Everything looks bleak. And this is why, of all things, Ignatius tells us we must humble ourselves. If you're not familiar with that prayer, the Litany of Humility, I would strongly suggest you download it. And if you can't find it, I think it's on the swordsofstmichael.org website. The Litany of Humility, I had to pray that prayer every single day for quite a few years. I was really full of pride for a long, long, long time. And not so much pride. It was more than pride. It was a stubborn resistance to anything that looked like authority. And it was a big hurdle. So if you are going through something right now in this chapter, or in this formation topic of discernment of spirits, you're not going to be able to accurately discern where you're at without humility. Humility is going to be that mirror, that gateway that says, yep, Lord have mercy on me, a sinner. I don't know anything without you, Christ. I know nothing. That's when your guardian angel is going to step in and going to carry you. That's when you are going to completely rely on all that faith, all that love, all that joy that you had when you were in spiritual consolation. So how can we objectively, which is really, really hard to do when you're in spiritual desolation because everything is just the pits and it's nasty and it's horrible. How can we objectively identify that we are being attacked, that we are not listening to good spirits, we're not listening to guardian angels, we are listening to the demonics? How are we going to figure out on a regular basis when we do this? Are there some things we can write down? Are there some practices we can put into place that we see them coming and go, yep, that's not of God? And we must always compare everything. All of our thoughts must be run by God. What did God say about this? What's Jesus saying about this? Because when we're thinking these thoughts that are in our head and that we're confused about, we must run them by that positive source. And if you'll just excuse me for a second. Alan, you had a question in chat. If you do have a question in chat, since this is a live show, please type in all caps and one of my moderators will make sure that I do not miss it, because I do not want to miss a question. This is a very powerful lesson about balance. And it's important that if we have something that is on our hearts and we need to ask a question, there are no stupid questions ever. So thank you for asking that question, Alan. If you want to pop it in there, go right ahead. So I wanted to finish up this chapter talking about balance with something that we can write in our journals, because a lot of us, I was never a good journal person. I didn't do it. However, when I started writing again about 15 years ago, I realized that the power of understanding where I want to be and where I am now lies in looking at the successes and quote-unquote failures. And it's just like the spiritual desolation and consolation right now. When we see what we've written down and we see we're not there anymore, we can take a lot of hope in knowing we're not going to stay there. So, for this chapter, what I put down here is I wanted us to think about what we've got going on, in the sense that we're looking at taking strength in our Creator and our Lord in order to find the state of mind that brings us balance. Now, when we're looking at a state of mind that brings us balance, Ignatius has told us specifically that we need to look at an attitude. It's awareness, it is understanding, and then it's action. And I think that can be kind of tough for any of us, because when we're in the middle of desolation, it's really, really hard to understand and be aware of what's happening, because our emotions are so roiled up and our mind is being torn in 2 or 3 different places. So let's just try and figure out what's important. And when we're in spiritual desolation, how can we be aware that our mind is being attacked, that our positive thoughts and our positive hope is being undermined constantly by a reminder that we're not good enough, we're stupid, we can't figure this out, God has left us, He's not there? That awareness, if that's not right, we were consoled by God, we were consoled by the guardian angels, we were consoled by these things that love us. And this is something that basically we have to understand, without that, we're going to be in a quagmire. We're going to just drop ourselves into this, oh, it's terrible, it's horrible. We're not doing enough. So when we're aware that those thoughts aren't ours, they're not coming from our head, they don't come from deep within us, then we see that, where's our journal? Where were our prayers a month ago when they were being answered, when we were being lifted up and we were given all this consolation, all this joy from all these prayers? I think the biggest thing for me is when I do rosary novenas and I see such great miracles happening all around me, and I'm in awe. So when I hit spiritual desolation, I forget about those things. I forget about those things because I think the devils make you focus on you and your problems and your lack of any worth. So they blind you instantly by pounding all these messages in your head, so you don't remember all these miracles all around you. And I want to say hello to Billy, who dropped in, and hello to Democrats for Trump. And it's so good to see you. But I think each one of us can take away from this seeking the balance. We can take away either a pointed awareness of when we do get discouraged, excuse me, a pointed awareness, or we can take away the fact that we have had consolations. There's so many times in our lives that we can count wonderful, great things that happen. And God is going to be there in the dark, in the light. He's always going to be there, waiting to help us, waiting with his guardian angel, waiting to give us the love, the attention, and can I say the support that we need? Because each one of us have a guardian angel that is waiting to help us at any minute, any second. We may not see them. We may think, well, my guardian angel, why did he let this happen? And why did he let that happen? Let me tell you something from who I am and where I am and what I know goes on in the spiritual warfare. We cannot see the fights that our guardian angel fights for us. We cannot see all of them. And what it is, God doesn't need us to know the fights that they've got. And I have a really important point that somebody has brought up in chat that I want to read to you, because this is really, really good. Sometimes, and this is from somebody that I know fairly well, and this is something that I would like you all, if you're seeking spiritual direction, or if you don't have a spiritual director and you do need to speak to a pastor, nun, priest, etc., think about this statement very strongly, because this is a common, shall I say, a tripwire. And I call this comment a tripwire because it leads you to believe that you're not going to get help that you need. You're not going to get somebody to help you understand and guide you in your journey. So this comment is that I was talking with my spiritual director about these demonic thoughts, about these desolations, this exact topic. And I talked to her about what I call demonic thoughts. You're stupid, you're a loser, you're ugly. The spiritual director was very uncomfortable with that, end quote. Now, let me tell you something. This is something that is very, very common. Because, number one, we have a lot of spiritual directors in all branches of profession. I'm lay professed sister. There are nuns that are professed that live in cloisters and convents. We have priests, we have deacons that are professed. If they are your spiritual director and they are uncomfortable talking about quote unquote demonic thoughts, about the attack of spiritual warfare, attack of the enemy, then maybe you need to pray and speak to a different spiritual advisor that can help you parse these out in discernment. Because just as there is a guardian angel, and there are beautiful angels that assist your guardian angel, including, the guardian angel of your marriage, the guardian angel of your family. There are so many angels. A director that is unfamiliar with or does not want to talk about the attacks, the demonics, that do remind you who you are not, is probably somebody that's going to have difficulty in helping you survive and battle in the spiritual arena. And many of us, we may not feel like we need a spiritual director. We may not feel like that they can help us, or that, we do have other people we can turn to. When the time comes that you need to rely on someone, their faith is going to be your rock to grow your faith. Their understanding of the spiritual warfare and the spiritual battle and this demonic oppression that actually occurs within our brain, we can't deny it, and we can't be uncomfortable. We have to be open about it. If we're not open, what we hide, the devil loves to play inside that. We want to keep it out in the light. We want to talk about it. We want to laugh about it. We want to say, yeah, it's a good thing I got God. Jesus has got my back. And we also don't want to give credit to those voices in any way, shape, or form. We want to bind them away. We want to cast them far from ourselves. And if you need an instant sweet binding prayer that I guarantee will work in a few minutes or less, go to swordsofstmichael.org. And under the prayers and the helps and the binding prayers, there's a short form and a long form of an instant binding prayer that I guarantee you, if you say that prayer in faith over and over and over and over again, whatever it is that's pestering you will stop and run. So I'm going to check just to see in case I have any more comments or any more questions, because it's about time to tell you good night. Hello, Beyond Life. So good to see you all, Alan, Athena, and everybody here. I want you to know that my prayers are with you, because you guys are my support. And I want to thank my new Patreon supporter that I got. God bless you. I am doing my best to get back after the accident last year. And I do have some really interesting shows lined up, and I'm so excited for this channel, for this formation series. I'm going to be doing some shorts on spiritual warfare, deliverance, exorcism, all sorts of things. The things I love to talk about, the things I'm involved in. I mean, what do we write about? What do we talk about? The things we know. So this is it for tonight's show. I want to thank you. Say God bless you, God keep you, God protect you in all ways that you need. I'm always, if you ever have a question, I'm always available. I don't always get back as quick as I should, so please be patient with me. This is the channel, Swords of St. Michael. Give us a thumbs up, give us a like, leave us a comment. We seek to help you win the warfare and win it right. Always remember the battle's been won. God bless you. Take care. Thank you all for showing up tonight. And guess what? We'll be back next week with another episode of St. Ignatius Loyola, Discernment of Spirits. So keep on discerning. Keep on fighting back. Resist the enemy, and he will what? He'll flee. So God bless you all. Good night.